and you are live.
Thank you. Good evening. I call the February 16th, 2020 meeting of the Community Task Force to order. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us this evening via live stream. We are conducting this meeting online as is allowed by the state law under the current state of emergency due to the pandemic. With that being said, could we please have roll call?
Mr. Impanza,
Here.
Ms. Bannister,
Here.
Dr. Hoadley,
Here.
Ms. Merrier,
Here.
Mr. Robinson,
Here.
Mr. Shoji,
Here.
Ms. Shofara,
Here.
Mr. Wang,
Here.
Mr. White,
Present.
and Mr. Necky.
Here.
Jenny, I think Miss Eric Adams joined also. I don't know, Eric, if we were included in the roll call or not.
Here. Thank you, Dana.
And what about Sylvina? Did we already get her?
She just joined. So Sylvina, we were just
Sorry, I didn't
roll
see
call.
that.
So yeah, I think Sylvina just popped in as well.
I'm here.
Okay. I got it. Thank you.
I'm here.
Is that the conclusion of the roll call?
It is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members of the task force should have received the minutes of our previous meeting. Does anyone have any questions or changes regarding those minutes? I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Hi.
Aye.
All opposed, please say aye. All right, thank you. Now we'll move on to our next section of the agenda. Staff has prepared for us a presentation about the Beaverton Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan Model Framework that we are suggested to follow. It's a very good template, and I hope you guys all had a chance to review it quickly before the meeting. With that being said, I'll hand it over to staff so you guys can continue your presentation on that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Dana, and then Kirby Dearth is going to help me with this as well, but I'll say a few words to begin with. First of all, my apologies for not being here at the last meeting. I had a family emergency that I had to attend to, so I couldn't be here. So my apologies for that. Where we left off kind of before that, as I recall, was some question about what might a recommendation type framework look like going to City Council. I think I had forwarded you all prior to your last meeting an example of what the Historic Dublin Task Force had given City Council, and Kirby and I started doing a major search here on other examples of DEI type plans or strategies by other cities. And really, as it turned out, they were pretty hard to find, actually. There weren't a lot out there kind of on point with the kind of work that you all have been tasked to do. There are some out there. There are some who propose the way to do that. They found quite a few in university settings and not-for-profit settings, but not so many in cities specifically. Additionally to that, there have been a lot of DEI type offices set up in various cities and the like, but not so much in the way of actual frameworks or plans. So we came across this one from Beaverton, and it's actually the second generation Beaverton DEI plan, and it struck us as perhaps a framework that you all could consider using. Again, you don't have to do this. You don't have to use this as a framework. I'd encourage you to consider it, though, given how it's laid out and the background that it sets and so forth. And I think what appealed to Kirby and I was that it actually reflected, I think, quite a bit of what you all had already been talking about and almost the way you organized your subcommittees as well. So that appealed to us, and we thought, well, this could be a good framework or concept or model or example to advance to you all for consideration. And the thing that I want to make sure I'm emphasizing here is that I know that, first of all, this has been a great process. It's been a really good dialogue, and really appreciate what everyone has done and the time and effort that you've given it to date. I also will be the first one to recognize it's been a little bit frustrating too, probably because in this environment of COVID, it's been hard to really, in fact, we haven't been able to, right? Get together, really interact, have lots of public engagement, conversations and the like I think we had really hoped that we would be able to do through this process. So knowing that we're a little bit stifled with that, not that we can't open this sort of setting up and have discussion and dialogue with the public, which we can certainly do at any point. Still probably would not be like we would have done otherwise had we been able to gather as a community. So the thing that I guess I'm asking the task force to consider, and I appreciate the conversation I had with both the chair and the vice chair last week, who actually endorsed the idea of at least advancing this to you all for thought. And that was that, moving ahead, the thing that I would ask you to really consider is the notion of trying to be big picture oriented, being very strategic in your approach and your thoughts at this point, knowing that, and I think it's safe to say that this would be an ongoing type of engagement into the longer run. And specifically, you may have seen where I referenced or mentioned the idea of a diversity advisory board or committee or something like that could continue beyond the time frame of the task force, or maybe the task force itself continues in some fashion for a longer period of time to enable sort of the implementation of some of the ideas and thoughts that you all may have in this process. So I guess I don't want you to give up on the idea of really the opportunity to engage the public directly and have more of that kind of involvement. But to spend maybe most of your energy right now and with your subcommittees and so forth focused on sort of a framework like this, trying to give us the strategic big picture ideas of what we could do going forward, and maybe putting some aspirational goals and the like behind those as more leaning more towards the action items that we could carry forward in a post-pandemic kind of a situation. So in other words, let's try to make the best of what we got while we can with who we've got and the manner in which we have to do it. And thinking that maybe this might work as that's sort of a framework that might help to get us there. So with that, we did send the DEI plan for Beaverton, Oregon out to you. Just hopefully had a chance to take a quick glance at it. What we thought we would do is very quickly sort of recap how that was put together, and then have a discussion about whether you think this sort of approach might work. Again, I'm kind of going back and trying to answer the question that I thought I heard a couple meetings ago about what does a recommendation strategy look like when you advance that back to City Council. So with that, let me hand it over to Kirby real quick. And Kirby, if you could just kind of quickly walk through the overview, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dana. Good evening, members of the task force. Like Dana said, my name is Kirby Dirth. I'm an intern in the office of the city manager and a graduate student at The Ohio State University. So to start, let's take a look at the Beaverton model. Beaverton, Oregon is a community situated just outside of Portland, Oregon. They're a suburban city which wields its own identity, kind of similar to how we are in the city of Dublin. Their diversity advisory board exists to advise City Council on effective equity and inclusion strategies. As you all have seen in their diversity plan, they do a great job of breaking down policy strategies into priority areas and giving general guidance as to how the city can execute on these goals. So following this model, the city of Dublin could incorporate the structure of the Beaverton DEI plan to organize the work of this task force. We propose producing a document that is introduced by a statement affirming citywide DEI efforts from City Council and a message from the Community Task Force. The document would subsequently present demographic information and a list of DEI terminology and definitions produced by the task force. Lastly, the document could walk through the recommendations of the task force within the lens of each of these priority areas. The first of which is public engagement. Public engagement.
Kirby, if I could,
Yeah.
I really just want to emphasize that, we're not trying to sell you on a group of priority areas. These are just what Beaverton used. So we're not too far removed from some of the dialogue you've had or the way you've even organized your subcommittee. So these are suggestive only and, not something we're suggesting you have to do. You can put your own spin on this sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to mention that they're incredibly broad, and these priority areas that we're about to go through give the subcommittees a good amount of space to drill down into specific suggestions that are related to our community. The first of which is public engagement. Their priority areas include communications and outreach, youth engagement, leadership development, and ensuring reflective government. As I said, these topics are relatively broad, and the assigned subcommittees can freely drill down. These policies tend to focus on the education and engagement of the public. There is a lot of overlap between these priority areas, creating an issue with our current subcommittee structure with having a communications and an education subcommittee. However, one point of opportunity is to establish a youth engagement subcommittee to focus on youth engagement efforts.
And I would add there that in that the youth appointees are my appointees, and after consultation with the chair and vice chair, I am intending to take the youth that are on the subcommittee or on the committee. So that's Audrey, Will, Jamil, and Sammy. And I reached out to them and asked if they would be interested in forming a youth subcommittee so that they could have a little bit more time focused together. And they were very responsive to that and excited to do that. So, at their own initiative, they want to meet every Monday for like the next 4 or 5 Mondays to have a discussion. So they're already excited to try to take that on. So we're going to move forward with the youth to have that discussion. But that doesn't mean they can't participate in everything else if they choose to do that. So.
Absolutely. So next we have city practices. This priority area represents the goals of the city as an organization to have a reflective government workforce, to contract diverse talent, to practice cultural responsiveness, and to ensure equity in service provision. During future task force meetings, you will have briefs from city staff regarding our progress related to these priority areas and have an opportunity to provide your input. Next, we have economic empowerment. This is largely the focus of the economic subcommittee, focusing on workforce diversity, mobility, transportation, how cities can promote diverse entrepreneurship, access to higher educational attainment, and how to address the racial wealth gap and address needs. Excuse me. Following that is housing and livability, which will also be a focus of the subcommittee. These areas include the participating in the MORPC regional housing study, conducting a local housing study, cementing the city as a regional leader in addressing housing needs, participating in regional efforts to address homelessness, establishing quality housing and tenant protections, and expanding home access. Next, we have public safety. Public safety's priority areas will largely be addressed by the Chief's Advisory Committee. They include establishing an advisory committee, which we have done, recruiting and retaining demographically representative police workforce, culturally responsive public safety staff, community engagement to develop relationships and communal trust, maintain CALEA accreditation standards, identify vulnerable populations, and addressing their needs. And lastly, we have community building and inclusion. Again, these priority areas cover a range of topics which are of interest of both the communication and the education subcommittee. These priority areas include developing an education speaker series, training series regarding diversity and inclusion, which you'll hear a report from our education subcommittee from Kofi tonight, and that's one of our topics of interest that we spoke of at our last subcommittee meeting. Learning how to integrate cultural awareness and celebration into city events, acknowledging diversity in public places, and promoting Dublin as an inclusive city. This convergence of interests serves as an opportunity to maybe merge the subcommittees to unite under common priority areas and have a communication and education subcommittee all under one umbrella. So I'm going to open this up for some questions and prompt discussion. I'm going to go through each of these questions and please feel free to provide your input in however you see fit. So first off, do you believe that these are logical endpoints that reflect the goals of the task force that were prescribed by City Council? Do you think this is a good end goal for our task force?
I definitely do. I'm really pretty excited about the structure, the framework this creates for us to, use as a launching pad, sort of, and to Dublinize it, and also to do the necessary edits and modifications so that it's more consistent with what the task force knows our community needs. So I think it meets what City Council wanted, at least from my understanding. I'm assuming other folks are pretty excited about it as well.
Yeah, I would echo that excitement, Bridget. I think it's Dana, I think this is a great example of what we can do together at the strategic level, which really is what I think City Council is hoping that we can deliver to them. And it gives them some direction as far as next steps, where the city can't be able to take this framework. And again, I think it requires us to fine tune it and Dublinize it to make it more robust to our city. But it gives them the ability to then take that strategic framework and do deeper dives on the data side, on the execution side. But really what they need are those guideposts. And I think this task force with an example like this would equip them with those guideposts that they've asked us to help deliver.
Stephen, those are great insights, and I appreciate your support. Your comments about the guideposts lead me to my next question. Do these guideposts give the subcommittee enough space to engage and be creative? Or I guess what I'm getting to here is, are they too restrictive, or do you feel as if in first glance they give you enough space to do your work and to leave your imprint?
I definitely agree that it gives us a good starting point. And as folks have mentioned earlier, we can expand from those based on what our overall vision is for Dublin. But as the subcommittee, the Economic and Infrastructure subcommittee has met already and discussed this previously, there were a lot of focal points that aligned with what we had originally discussed in terms of recommendations. So I think it's a great starting point and will allow us to go outside of that and be creative in terms of what is relevant for Dublin and what we want to focus and hone in on as a city. So I think this was great. A great thing that you guys have found and shared for sure.
Thank you, Erica. And if there aren't any other comments on that question, I'll move on to my next, which we've kind of already addressed. But do you see any of the priority areas that are in desperate need of being added or adjusted? And I don't mean the specifics. I mean the major bullet points being economic development, community engagement, outreach and engagement. Are there any that we missed that we may need to add in before you break up into subcommittees and move forward? I see some heads shaking no. Hearing no comment, we'll move forward. And so my last question is, do our current subcommittees make sense in the context of these priority areas? We addressed some of the overlapping interests of the communications and the education subcommittees. And branching off of that, would you support merging the education and communications subcommittees? Know that the education subcommittee is often running. Communications subcommittee is having some trouble out the gate, and it could pose a good opportunity to unify those interests in the sake of common goals.
I think that's a great idea. Sorry, Chairman, go ahead.
No, you can finish. Go ahead.
I was going to say I would recommend. I think that's a good recommendation to merge those two subcommittees. I think there's a lot of overlap in the goals there, but then also the dialogue that could happen can be more robust by merging those two together.
And I was going to add that I do believe that our subcommittees are almost matched perfectly with the presentation that was given and the priorities that was laid out. And I also do believe that I do support that education and the communication subcommittee do be merged, since a lot of the goals are similar. So that could be of a lot of help.
Dana, are there any official actions that we have to take to merge subcommittees, or it's an agreement all we need?
No, I would prefer direction from the task force, however you want to do that, Mr. Chair. Before we do that, though, I'd like to ask Isao Shoji and the chief if they feel that the Chiefs Advisory Committee could work in this vein to similarly provide, recommendations like this as well back to the task force. Any thoughts on that, Isao or Chief?
Dana, thank you. Yeah, I mean, jump in front of Mr. Shoji, but we certainly can work towards a contribution. We certainly were developed in a similar timeline as the Community Task Force, and Isao being on both the Community Task Force and the Chiefs Advisory Committee give us a great connectivity to be able to have a communication back and forth between the groups as we develop some of the discussions on where we're going as a police department. I think it's important, just as the presentation showed today, that we keep in mind how much work we're doing as a community as a whole to talk about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We absolutely, as the Beaverton, Oregon template provides us, can have those discussions about public safety as part of our discussions as an advisory committee, and bring some recommendations back to the Community Task Force for the overall plan as well.
I seem to be having issues unmuting myself. Apologize for a delay there. I concur with the chief's perspective. I think there's always been a current of, underlying current of wanting to work closely with and in conjunction with the task force on the side of the Chiefs Advisory Committee. And I think this will work out very nicely where we can complement each other. And some of the subtopics that were under the public safety topic, like community engagement, that certainly has been a very heavily discussed topic for us. And so, as in many other areas that other people have already mentioned, I think this is going to be a good fit for the committee.
Good. Well, Mr. Chair, thanks for letting me pose that question. I wanted to make sure they were okay with it. So, barring other conversation, which you may want to have, again, I would emphasize that, this is, again, is sort of a framework, a guidepost, an idea. I heard someone use the word Dublinize, which is a great way to look at it, right? We want this for our community and what's going to be best for our community, your community, the way you see it. This is your opportunity to have that impact on Dublin for a long time to come. So, so therein lies the challenge of the subcommittees and the task force and the Chiefs Advisory Committee to lay that groundwork for the community. So I would suggest you have previously determined your subcommittees to be the economic, the communication, and the education. I would subcommittees at this point, which can always be changed, as the economic, education, and communication subcommittee is the second one. The third one's the Chiefs Advisory Committee. The fourth one is the youth subcommittee, and then of course we have a couple other subcommittees I would suggest that are kind of happening. One is the one regarding the city and the city as an organization, and we're going to be here next month briefing you on, giving you an update on that. So you kind of have a default subcommittee already working there. I would also suggest that J.M. Rayburn and Officer Amber McCluskey has been doing a lot of work engaging the LGBTQ community and have actually advanced to me a number of thoughts and recommendations as my designated LGBTQ liaisons to the community, some thoughts and ideas, which, you know, they can certainly present back to the task force itself as thoughts that can be integrated with the plan, however you might see fit. So really, Mr. Chair, I think those are kind of all of them that are kind of actively working. I don't know if you want to give direction or adopt those as maybe the official ones that we're using right now, knowing that that could be subject to change or addition as you go down the road.
Just so I have it clear, we're thinking about 1, the economic and infrastructure. 2 would be education and communication. 3 is the chief advisory. 4 would be the youth. And then was there a 5th, or the 5th was just weird brainstorming? Yeah,
I would say the 5th is would be the city as an organization, because one of council's charges to both the task force and the Chiefs Advisory Committee is to provide advice to the chief and to the city manager on the diversity, equity, inclusion plans involving our organizations. So, and the organization as a city is an organization in and of itself. So if you could count let's call it the city as an organization or city subcommittee, would be fine as a 5th one, if that's all right.
That sounds good with me. So would I have to start a motion on approving those 5 subcommittees?
I don't believe you used a motion to form the subcommittees. I think you established that in one of your meetings.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that though, so the task force is formally adopting these as a direction.
Okay.
I'll accept a motion to approve the 5 subcommittees that we talked about. One being economic and infrastructure, 2 education and communication, 3 would be Chiefs Advisory, 4 is the youth subcommittee, and 5 would be the cities or city as an organization. I'll now accept a motion to approve those 5.
So moved. I second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, thank you for that.
Can I just make one comment to the task force about specifically the idea of whether there's enough space to engage and create, and how we can adopt the template for our own needs? I think given the fact that we just approved the subcommittees, we know that in those subcommittees, it's very likely that we're not going to think of all the important DEI topics. So maybe we can all just be open to the sense that there may be recommendations, aspirational goals, as Dana called them, that will come to the task force, maybe not through the subcommittee, or perhaps sort of late to the subcommittee because we think of it later. But I think it's up to us to to accept that and embrace that so that we have a better recommendation at the end. And I'm sure, I assume we're all in line with that, but I just wanted to encourage that so that, you know, in a few months, if someone feels like they didn't have an opportunity to bring up something, it might not be too late. And even if it doesn't fit in the subcommittee, they can bring it to the chair or myself, or just bring it up in the task force so that we can consider it.
Yeah, good comment. Bridget, I agree with that. I think we should always be welcoming to the public if they have an issue or an idea that they want to bring before this body. Recognizing that, yes, we've got the subcommittees in place as a structural component, but we're always open to the public bringing in ideas that we can explore. And I think that goes along with something that was brought up earlier, Dana's point, in that we're operating in this virtual environment as opposed to sort of a traditional sort of city hall environment where folks can kind of show up. Is that being even more open to feedback from the public, I think is a good thing.
And by the way, there's a number of ways we can approach that too. You know, we can, as your plans are drafted, we can put those out there for public comment. Residents can observe this meeting and they can email in thoughts and ideas. I think, in fact, we have that going on right now. And we can try to open up this proposed document at some point when you get to a point where we could have a survey, or we could somehow put it out there and have sort of a public hearing, if you will, in this sort of a format. That takes a lot of, we can get there, we can do it. It takes a lot of pre-planning to do it. And we certainly want people to have that opportunity before we go to council for adoption. I know council will be looking for input at the time they consider it as well from the public. So we'll try to do those check-ins now as we start to sort of formulate the more specifics on what it is you're proposing. And it's a great opportunity for people to give feedback on or give input to, now that they know maybe what your focus areas will be, and as you formulate those. So there's still a lot of opportunity for that.
Well, unless there are any other comments, I'm going to pass it over to Dana, and he's going to talk about the timeline for moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Kirby. Mr. Chair, is okay we go on to that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so Kirby, if you'll go ahead. Yeah, thank you. So I emailed to you all and I apologize, it's kind of my way of thinking. I'm a checklist kind of guy, but I emailed to you a document that had a laundry list of actions and items in a timeline, and in what I called a milestone and timeline kind of a document. What I tried to do is show you kind of a rhythm of what it could look like as you try to formulate your plan, your strategy, thinking that, the council gave us 1 year to achieve the mission of the task force. That would be in August of this year. So then I did some backward planning from there. So this just kind of lays out how and what the rhythm might look like here. And in my list that I gave you, it actually had action items to do prior to the next meeting. So that document talks about what you might want to review at your meeting, what your actions might be before the next meeting, and then how the next meeting picks up and moves on through the process. So March 16th, and this is something I'd been talking to the chair and vice chair about anyway, was I think the way your agenda is set up, you always want your subcommittees coming back to the task force and reporting out on where they are at that point in time and what they've been talking about. And this gets to Bridget's point about how do you kind of vet out and give everyone the opportunity to hear and have input to that. So the subcommittees, if we get in a rhythm where your subcommittees are truly meeting between your task force meetings, then they're bringing to the next task force meeting those items that they've talked about previously. You've already gotten into that rhythm a bit and giving updates. So this would be to sort of in March to sort of give an update on where you are about those key priority areas that you're agreeing to work on. the staff is going to start drafting that demographic assessment. We've shared some of that demographic data with you before. We have that through a lot of different means, and start to draft what that sort of chapter, if you will, of your report might look like, so you all can see that before we finalize. We'll start drafting that. I had intended in March to do a presentation, a very brief one, on where the city's been and where we are as a city organization relative to DEI and our self-assessment. And I was going to have my assistant city manager, Homer Rogers, and Stephen Francis, our consultant, to give you an update on that. I thought while we had Stephen available, we could perhaps roll into, and I've asked him if he could take a look at suggesting a list of terminology and definitions that perhaps you all could take a look at. One thing the Beaverton plan did, I think, pretty well is lay down what sort of common terminology and those definitions could be, so we could have a little bit of dialogue around that and have some common core type vernacular that we use, and that could be used by the community. So then in March 16th, after that meeting, you all would then you would give us a feedback and have discussion around these things. You would then go to subcommittee meetings before the April 18th meeting. At the April 18th meeting, then your subcommittees would present aspirational goals for each of the key priority areas they've identified. The task force would start to review the draft of the demographic assessment that the city staff drafts for you. And then we would provide a copy of the update report to council, to the task force. The chair and I are required to report to council on occasion, and we've not quite done that yet. So I thought April would be a good time, Mr. Chair, for us to it's a written report that we would send to the council. But before I send that, I thought, obviously, I'll author it. You can help. You can give me your input and guidance on it, and we'll share it with the task force before we submit it to City Council. But at least we will check in with City Council, make sure we're headed in the right direction. Kirby, next slide. So then when we go to May, in preparation for May, you'll do your subcommittees and do the work. The subcommittees in May, the subcommittees would present your final proposed aspirational goals for each of those key priority areas that we're undertaking. Our draft demographic assessment of the city and region, you'll look at that again. Hopefully we'll get that pretty close to being finished by this time. And then the community task force would discuss or amend and approve aspirational goals for each of the key priority areas. So hopefully this is moving the subcommittees along with those ideas. And then the task force formally adopts the demographic assessment and terminology. So we really want to try to get to a point where we're formally adopting that. We could either get that done on the 18th or at least do a really heavy review so that we can come back in June for a final adoption. So between May and June, you're still going back into subcommittees and doing the work of the subcommittees. And in June, at that meeting, subcommittees would present proposed measures or indicators. I know that there's been a lot of interest in measurement or what might indicators be that would show that those focus areas and those aspirational goals are in fact being met potentially. So you could actually come up with some of those as part of this plan. The task force you would present that to the task force for either adoption or discussion. The task force would review the initial draft of the City of Dublin DEI plan. So by June, we're hoping that as you move through the reaffirmation of the key priority areas, the aspirational goals for those, and we're adopting those along the way, and then measures and indicators that you want to assign to those, that we can keep advancing this sort of a rolling building document to June, and then we would have a draft of what this would look like. So the draft would include those things that Kirby mentioned early on that were like in the Beaverton plan. So it was a statement from council, a statement from the task force, the demographic assessment, common terminology, the priority areas, what aspirational goals might look like in support of those, and what might measurements indicators look like. So I think too, about the June timeframe, then you might want to have a discussion based on your strategy or proposed strategy. And I don't want to assume that you want to do this, but I'm somewhat assuming you want to do this. Well, how would we get to the implementation phase of a strategy? And I think that might be best served with the idea of an advisory board going forward or an extension of the task force. I mentioned this early on when we started talking that the goal of the charge of the task force is to provide some guidance, but this will take time to implement. And you'll certainly want the community engaged in that and some oversight of that process to make sure we're following along that strategy. So we're used to having citizen advisory committees that go on it. We have a community service advisory committee. We've had a technology advisory committee. We've had all kinds of committees over the years that help the city and help guide the city on implementation and gives us a sounding board for implementation of things. Could also be a convener of the public going forward for discussion and ongoing dialogue. Kirby, go ahead to the next slide. And then on July 18th, I know we're getting into the summer months, but hopefully we can squeak another meeting out of you in July. The subcommittees would present your final proposed measures and indicators to be incorporated in the final strategy. The task force would discuss or amend and approve those measures or indicators for each one if need be, and then hopefully adopt those. And then the task force proposes resources needed to support the City of Dublin DEI plan. So it's not like you're going to come up with a strategy and go, okay, here you go, city, and this is your strategy. But I'd really like to see all of us have a good discussion on making sure that we're appropriately resourcing it going forward and what might those resources consist of, and incorporate those into a final draft. So we're not forgetting that a good plan, a good strategy has to be resourced and actioned out. And I certainly would like your input and guidance on that. And then hopefully, if all goes well, we could get to City Council in August with a proposed plan that the chair and vice chair would present on your behalf. Now, I just want to say this is flexible. I'm sure council understands that this pandemic environment that we're in has made this a challenge, and it's tough to get all these things done. So that can be a little bit flexible in that time frame. But I wanted to start with what council's charge was and then sort of backward plan into that. So sorry for the long presentation, but that kind of gives you an idea of how the rhythm can work to try to get a strategy in place or recommendations in place. So Kirby's got more questions for you.
Thank you, Dana. So the real question is, do you guys think that this timeline provides enough space and time for you guys to complete these actions? And do you have any general comments or concerns regarding the proposed timeline for moving forward?
It's not nearly ambitious enough, Dana.
Well, I'm a checklist kind of guy. Sorry about that. So I am flexible. This, I just want to staff you, give you the resources you need so that you're productive and feel like you're moving forward and getting these things done. And I've owed that to you for a couple months. It's been, quite frankly, it's been a little bit hard to get my own mind around the way ahead, but I think this sort of framework that we found has been helpful to that end. Not that you have to do exactly that. So,
based on this conversation, I'm wondering if the expectation is that the Chiefs Advisory Committee follows this timeline exactly and be able to wrap up their discussion in this timeline. If so, that is going to be, well, I don't want to speak for the whole committee, but it is going to be a bit of a change of pace, I believe, because I think the committee has been operating with its own timeline, certainly paying attention to what's been going on in the task force. But we, for example, spent 2 full meetings discussing school resource officers because we felt that should be a focus. I'm starting to wonder, more or less thinking out loud here, whether it is going to be their consensus that they can easily follow this timeline. I'm not 100% sure about that. Let me just put it out there without saying yay or nay.
That's a really fair question, and one I would certainly expect all of you to raise. The thing that I would ask you all to keep in mind is that the idea here isn't to solve everything, but to provide a roadmap so that we can have a way ahead, so that we can continue our work. The Chiefs Advisory Committee will continue to work. That one does not have an end date to it. In fact, those people have terms that they serve. So that advisory committee was intended to be ongoing. The reason the task force was set up as a task force is because task forces are intended to be more short-lived in order that they are focused on coming up with recommendations that can be sort of finalized and presented back. And then from that, council would decide, okay, what's the best way to implement these things and what will they need in order to do that, which is why I suggest probably an advisory committee is something that will be enduring in some fashion. So the idea is to not have all the answers to everything, but to have the roadmap ahead so that this can be an ongoing process, but one that has direction to it, if you will, and sort of defined areas that we're going to be working in. So, I hope maybe the Chiefs Advisory Committee could look at it from that perspective, and in the coming months be able to say, okay, we know we want to talk about school resource officers or recruiting or body cameras or whatever those things might be. Well, if those are the topics you want to discuss, then those become the aspirational goals that the committee wants to address. Does that make sense? And then that kind of gets back into the recommendations. So just might be a way to think about it.
I would propose in the not so distant future, perhaps we have a conversation among the chair and vice chair of the task force and the Chiefs Advisory Committee so that everybody can be on the same page. I'm not sure if that also needs to be a public meeting or not, but whatever the format that it needs to be in, I think that would be helpful.
Dan, if I could
I'll
jump
be
in,
happy to be in that as well.
If I could jump in and just offer, so we're still ironing out the agenda for the Chiefs Advisory Committee, which is scheduled for next week. But we have plugged in as part of that ongoing discussion and a Chiefs update to the advisor or to the advisory committee. And part of what we're going to talk about is the Beaverton plan and framework to lay that foundation for those discussions with the advisory committee as well. And for the advisory committee, for Esau and I, and for the members of the advisory committee, we're going to wear a couple of hats for those future discussions for a little while until we answer both this request at the larger discussion for the task force on that public safety, those public safety points. And again, broad discussion points, not necessarily all the way down in the weeds and the X's and O's of the other discussions that we may have as far as policy from a community and police engagement perspective on individual topics, but those broader categories that may also capture those individual topics as time goes along. But we will do everything we can to lay the right foundation, Esau, in the next meeting to make sure we can answer both the responsibility to the community task force, but also continue to engage in those ongoing discussions about individual portions of policy that the community is interested in hearing about from the police department perspective.
I think if the expectations can be shared, it is absolutely doable. Right now, I feel like a little bit more conversation would be helpful.
I understand that completely. So, and we certainly would want that to happen. So, I mean, by all means, if you want to have that conversation and circle back to the chair, vice chair, of course, that's up to Kofi and Bridget about that. So, but yeah, that would be nothing but really healthy to have that conversation. So.
Also, if you do think it's best for the chair or vice chair to pop in on one of your meetings, just let us know. We'll be more than willing to have some dialogue with you guys. And also to comment on the timeline. I appreciate the timeline that was suggested because I feel like it gives a sense of direction that will benefit all of us. Sometimes I feel like that's something we've lacked. So for that to be suggested, I really appreciate it. And it just provides a good outlook for us and lets us know if we need to pick up the tempo or not. So I appreciate the timeline that was suggested to us.
For what it's worth, for those of you who are like myself, where you haven't been on this sort of, task force or a subcommittee, I feel like in our economics and infrastructure subcommittee today, it became a little more clear to me, like how we actually get work done. And I think it's a combination of when you come together in the subcommittee, you know, defining the aspirational goals, the directions you want to take. And then to me, and Erica and Esau, if you disagree, let me know. I feel like what we realize now is we now need to put on paper and maybe share ideas, perhaps via email with each other, so that we can come up with maybe the equivalent of a laundry list that then as a subcommittee we can review during our official subcommittee meeting and make decisions about those that then let us take it to the task force. And I guess I would, you know, we've talked before, it's a little challenging to figure out how we don't want to violate any rules, but we also actually need to like come together some way. So our goal, we're realizing that we can talk about things or do email exchanges without making any decisions, and then bring that, be prepared and bring it to the subcommittee so that you can get action on it to then get it to the task force. We just figured that out.
It was a productive meeting.
Yes, agreed, agreed.
Well, like I said, I don't want anyone to have great anxiety around the time frame. I'm sure city council can be a bit flexible. You know, and the one thing I didn't put in there that was brought up that we could or should, and we likely should before it goes to council, is to somehow find ways along the way to vet this with the public so that it's really out there and they can have input, and you can put things out there and bounce ideas back. So we'll figure out ways to get that done along the way. And if we need a little bit more time to be able to get that done, that's all good. That's all good. So, you know, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you're going through this. Okay, well, I'll take that as a yes in terms of some of these products and things we're going to start advancing in these meetings. We'll shape agendas. I'll work with the chair and vice chair around that, and obviously get their direction as they might want to, or as you all might want to adjust as we move along. So I think we'll get things advanced this way. So thank you all very much for your consideration on this. And I want to apologize for taking a while to get my head around it myself and trying to figure out a way. And like I said, this doesn't have to be the answer, but it's a framework we can work within. And if you all want to make adjustments or changes or change route, you know, direction, you know, just, we're here to support. So.
Thank you for the presentation. Moving on, if no one else has anything to say, we'll be moving on to our subcommittee updates. Would someone from Economic and Infrastructure be willing to provide us with an update?
I can do that, and I invite Erica and Esau to just add on anything if I've missed something important. Just briefly, the Economics and Infrastructure Subcommittee has met twice since our last task force meeting a month ago. There are 3 of us currently on the subcommittee, and we've just generally been trying to collect information about what the city's been working on when it comes to DEI. We've been researching our own sense of what we would recommend and reaching out to some folks. We have been primarily focused on workforce issues, economics in general, somewhat city practices like, you know, contract vendor relationships. And then more recently, jumping more into mobility, which for those who aren't sure, right now we're sort of defining it as getting folks who don't live in Dublin to their jobs in Dublin. Today, Erica typed up a nice initial draft of aspirational goals for the city on some of these topics, and we're going to spend, like I just mentioned, the 3 of us will spend some time fleshing out these topics so that we can then share them and be more prepared next month to maybe vote on them, or at least agree that they're great and then add on to them. Just briefly, we did hear from the Economic Development Division. We may hear from them again next month. The next month meeting, we have a couple guests if anybody want to join us. We're likely to hear from DEC, the Dublin Entrepreneurial Center. We're going to hear about existing mobility efforts in Dublin, which are pretty extensive that we didn't really realize existed, that we want to hear more about. And then the big separate topic in the Economics and Infrastructure Subcommittee that we haven't touched on yet is housing. And we agreed as a subcommittee that we wouldn't break out into another subcommittee. So housing will stay housed with us. And given the timeline, we're going to have to get started on that stuff quickly. And I'd invite anybody else, Stephen White, who might be interested in joining us. Stephen, I mentioned your name only because you had talked about housing last month, and we'd love to have other folks work with us on those issues. And then our next meeting is Tuesday, March 16th at 8:30 a.m. if anybody wants to join us. And did I forget anything big that you guys want to add?
I don't think so.
All right, thank you for that update. Moving on to education. Education, we had our first, I'll provide our update. We had our first meeting 2.5 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. It started off very well. Some core things that we talked about was we broke up into little small units. Each small unit is tasked with really finding out a topic that's geared towards educating the public and working on this little mini project, reporting it back this upcoming meeting on Thursday. This upcoming meeting this Thursday as well, we have Christine Nardecchia, who is the Director of Outreach. She's coming in to speak with us and answer any questions that we do have. I do believe that is the one thing that we talked about really that really spoke to me was planning on using the Dublin Library, utilizing it some more for community outreach. That's something I'm really looking forward to talking some more with the subcommittee. With that being said, I don't have any more updates unless anyone else has anything they were willing to share. All right, perfect. And with the communications subcommittee, we talked about we're going to be merging that one with education. We have a lot of similar goals, similar topics. So looking forward to that. And moving on to updates, we'll be starting with the school. Dr. Hoadley, do you have any updates you are sharing with us today?
Sure. Thanks, Kofi. Just a couple, three. First off, great to see everybody here tonight. I've tried to keep you up to date and give you monthly updates on our progress for hiring our new diversity, equity, and inclusion director for Dublin City Schools. We did a nationwide search. We have over 150 applicants to date from all over the country. Our timeline, again, is looking to bring probably 9 or 12 candidates to committee interviews in early to mid-March. Right now, we're securing volunteer from our parent community who want to sit in on these interviews. We're going to use this type of online format. So it really actually gives us quite a few, a lot more capacity to bring in a large number of people to sit on the committee without being as maybe intimidating to a candidate. You know, if you've ever been a candidate walking into a group interview, you have 8 to 10 people there. That's one thing. You have 50 people there, you have a different. But with this online, it's a great way to include a much larger slice of our community. So if any member of our community here tonight or our public wants to be a part of that, they can contact our HR office at Dublin City Schools. And again, mid-March, 9 to 12 candidates. Like to land the plane, bring 3 candidates to the final round with late March or early April making an offer of employment. So really happy with the number of applicants. A lot from the higher ed world, some with some K-12 experience, and then another slice, I'd say, from more of the private sector. So really confident that we're going to land a great leader to lead that important work. I've shared before that we are utilizing Steve Francis. Dana mentioned Mr. Francis earlier. Mr. Francis will be doing some leadership development around racial injustice for our administration on March 4th. So that'll be, I think, his 4th time in the district this year. Again, providing great training for our administration. And then along the lines of our social studies curriculum, we are always working a year in advance. So when I talk about new courses, I'm talking about courses for the 22-23 school year, because believe it or not, our students at our high school are already scheduling right now for their classes for next school year. We start that process as soon as we hit January. So we've been utilizing and leveraging parent expertise throughout this school year. We have a couple additions that we're looking forward with, maybe a women's studies class, an African American studies class that we could add to our social studies department at our 3 high schools. And again, working on the curriculum, those projects have not been presented officially to our Board of Education for approval, but those are 2 classes in the pipeline potentially for the 22-23 school year. So those are the 3 items I wanted to share tonight, and happy to answer any questions that you may have. All right, thank you.
Thank you for that update. JM, do you have anything from the LGBTQ+?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have 2 updates for the group to this evening. The first one is around Kaleidoscope Youth Center. They are situated in downtown Columbus and serve LGBTQ+ youth, particularly those that need some extra, that may be homeless or maybe more vulnerable of the youth amongst us. They are expanding programming to Union County, which is exciting. So Dublin will be covered in many different ways with respect to Kaleidoscope services. I do want to remind the group that they still offer contactless resource pickups if you know any youth that may be interested or need some resources. And they do help with placing and housing if there's any homeless youth that you're aware of. So it's really important to be aware of that resource in our community and know that they're still offering their services during this time. The second item that I have to update is the Columbus Pride March and celebration will be virtual this year. That was announced a couple days ago, but I don't think it's on their website yet. It's something to be aware of. I know there's been a request to have Dublin show some sort of support for the Pride celebration, whether it be lighting up the bridge in a rainbow color, which there's been a link that's shared on Teams if anyone's interested in filling that out. But this could be a real opportunity for Dublin to think about if they do want to make a statement about Pride. Stonewall riots are on June 28th, and Dublin could take its own, I guess, stance of acknowledging that date and what it means for the LGBTQ movement. So I guess my point is it's always great to be in unison with what the region's doing. But since everyone's going virtual this year, I think it provides an opportunity for Dublin maybe to do something a little different. So something to consider as we move closer to the date. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
JM, do you, when you make that recommendation, which I appreciate, thinking ahead to June 28th, is there any suggestions about what this task force might consider doing?
I think the bridge is the request to light the bridge in a rainbow lighting is probably the easiest thing and actually could be the most impactful. Maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but just having a welcome mat and to know that you're appreciated and a visual cue like that is a big deal, I think, particularly for youth in our community. So I think that I would recommend that. That's the easiest thing that I think all of us could take time to do or at least support. Other than that, I think the city could acknowledge the Stonewall riots. I know for MLK Day, we did a nice social media post acknowledging the date and what it means. And I think something similar can be done for the Stonewall riots in June.
I think last month you said to support the lighting of the bridge, we would fill out the form as individuals. Is that still what you're recommending?
I think so. I think there's been requests that have been submitted, And there's some, I mean, Lindsay can talk more about this, I think, as well. But as I understand it, there are certain parameters you have to acknowledge, like I don't think it can be up for more than a week and some other things of that nature. But Lindsay, would you like to chime in? I'll let you handle that.
Absolutely. Thank you, JM, and good evening, everyone. Actually, on our website, we have the schedule, and it is now scheduled since this task force, since JM brought the request back the last time, the request has already somewhat been accommodated. So if you look on our website right now, it actually says that the bridge will be lit up multicolor in the month of June, TBD, for Pride celebration. Now, if you would like to suggest a specific day, as JM recommended, maybe to coincide with the Stonewall anniversary, that would be something that you could submit. But your wishes have kind of already come true, in that it looks like it's part of the schedule now for the month of June.
Just so everyone kind of understands how that's working, we've developed an internal policy about the bridge lighting because of the lighting package that's on it. We significantly modeled that calendar of lighting. Frankly, we modeled it after the Empire State Building. And if anybody's figured out lighting for the nation and all that, the Empire State Building kind of has. So we came up with a calendar that equates that. I've just recently circulated that to City Council. I've not heard any feedback yet. It's not, I don't think they will formally adopt it. It's an administrative regulation about bridge lighting. So we look at that calendar and all that's going on, you know, whether it's Pride or whether it's veterans events or what have you that's out there, the Irish Festival, all these different events throughout the city. And then we're trying to put timeframes against lighting. I don't know that we'll always be able to accommodate every request that might come along for lighting, but trying to sort of benchmark that against something that's withstood time, like the Empire State Building, because they can only do so many types of events every day. So that's generally the calendar that we've adopted, at least administratively, and just waiting for any kind of feedback from City Council. I do not foresee them actually formally adopting it, but at least that's an administrative plan for right now.
You know, Bridget, on second thought, you know, I think having the LGBTQ lens incorporated into the framework is a big win. And I think continuing to focus and include it as we have these discussions are much appreciated. So I think that, I mean, that might seem like a given, but it has a big impact and it's a big deal, particularly because I know there's some opportunities that we could still seek as a community.
Thank you.
JM, thank you for the update. Moving on to Chiefs Advisory Committee. Esau, do you have an update for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do. The conversation we were having about better integration and communication between this task force and the advisory committee was a timely one, because in the last meeting, our chair over at the Chiefs Committee, Judge Maynard, specifically asked that on behalf of the committee, I bring to everybody his and their well wishes, and that they are always open to more frequent communication or correspondence, and quite frankly, just working together. So this was a very timely topic that came up today. Last meeting, we had a presentation by Chief to go over the 2020 goals for the Dublin Police Department, as well as an overview of 2021 goals. And one of the things that, there were certainly many things that were discussed, but one of the things that Chief felt would be a focus in 2021 was better mental health awareness. 2020, because of the kind of year that we had, he felt that the department could have looked into it or spent more time on that particular topic internally. Here it will continue to be a focus so that they can finish up what they felt they wanted to do in 2020. We also had time of sharing where everybody was given a couple of minutes, since the last meeting for Chiefs Committee or Advisory Committee happened soon after January 6th, what happened at our state, the national capital. And if you recall, back in December, we also had 2 shooting deaths in Columbus and Central Ohio. And so those topics certainly weighed heavily on the committee members' minds, and everybody had a little bit of a chance to share what they were thinking about and feeling, and perhaps how, as a committee, we should respond. I think I shared with everybody, we also spent a lot of time on the school resource officers yet again, where the officers talked about their effort on mental health outreach with the students, or how much effort they put into building stronger relationships with every student, or the interactions between school disciplines and legal considerations of what may turn out to be troubles that happen at school. And looking forward to next meeting, the topics are going to be more in-depth discussions on certain policies, including critical incidents, use of force, or body camera. So these are topics, I think, Dana, you even mentioned use of force and body camera a little bit earlier in passing. They are definitely on the topics to be discussed next week or in the next meeting. And I believe the chair also wanted to include in that topic response to civil disobedience policy. So how the Dublin Police Department plans on or has planned on controlling a big crowd event. So those are some of the topics that are upcoming for us. And I will also be sure, based on today's conversation, that our chair and vice chair from the task force are in touch with the Chiefs Committee, Advisory Committee chair and vice chair. Sorry, it's a mouthful here, but I will be in the middle, try to see if I can set something up. That is all I have today.
Thank you for the update. Dana, do you have any city update for us?
Not really, other than what I mentioned already, and we're really going to be back here in March, giving you much more in-depth update as to what we're doing internally here at the city.
All right, thank you. Moving on, Vincent Wang has a few comments he wants to share with us concerning the Chinese community within Dublin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Dana suggested I share a few updates, and we had a couple of meetings last couple of weeks. I threw a few talk points into a shared PowerPoint. Do you mind if I share that? Okay, let me share my screen. Can I see my screen now? Where to present?
We can see it.
Okay, 3 things. So first of all, February the 12th was the Chinese New Year. It is also called Lunar New Year or Spring Festival. And also the Chinese community did an event on the New Year Day. And thirdly, I would like to share a little bit about our conversations with the Chinese community and also city of Dublin on the 4th. So the first one was we talked about Dublin Link lighting, and we are very appreciative that the city put in the lighting schedule for the Chinese New Year. The color red and gold, and it was shared on Twitter as well, and also we shared on WeChat. It was very well received, and so this year is the year of ox. Ox in the Chinese culture, it is a very good animal that stands for hope, resilience, and rebound. I think it is a very good theme for the year of 2021. We worked so hard. There are so many challenges in the past 1 year, and we're kind of seeing the light in the tunnel, and hopefully we'll have a very great new year ahead. And thank you so much for all your support. So in the meantime, to share the holiday spirit and also share our compassion of the community. So APAPA, Asian American Public Affairs Association, and also Ohio Chinese American Association, we organize a few fundraising among the community, raise some money to get 300 hot meals and deliver to the Van Buren shelter on the New Year Day. And also we raise the money to get face masks and also send this hand sanitizing soaps to the shelter as well. That is part of the relationship we have built since last year as part of the Food of Love Day last year. And also during the Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we also encourage the community to help with the Day of Service project to honor Dr. King. We delivered over 10,000 face masks to 4 homeless shelters and food pantries. So also I kind of copied last year's quick summary of the COVID relief efforts. We overall raised $200,000 to acquire personal protection equipment for the frontline workers, seniors, and the homeless shelters, and acquired over 150,000 face masks and 95 masks, and also 26,000 gloves and protective guns and so forth to help the healthcare workers. Donated over 2,300 handmade reusable cloth masks to the essential workers as well. And also, as part of the Asian Heritage Month last year, we also did a food drive to deliver over 12,000 meals to shelters and food pantries and the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. So that was part of the overall effort. These are the pictures of the volunteers and also the supplies, and the community overall was very active, engaged in the volunteer efforts, and also that can help build a bond between our local communities. That was the picture from last year's Chinese American Food of Love Day. And the third item was February 4th, Dana organized a meeting with the Chinese community. We have a few leaders participated, Pauline, Christine, Hong, and the conversation, especially Pauline. She was very passionate and about the disinformation in the past 1 year shared among the community, not just Chinese American community, and also the overall community as well. And she wanted to do something. She wanted to engage with very constructive conversations and brainstorm about what we can do. So we kind of shared about what we have done in the past, and also what are the options that are available for us to engage with the community members about different information and the disinformation. How do we identify those, and also how we help each other to find the right source of the information. So obviously the community task force is a great vehicle for us to convey the message and also the concerns of the community, and also what the city is trying to champion. And also we felt like establishing credible sources with the community is critical as well, and especially relying on community organizations like APAPA and OCAA. And also in the past, we have been working with the Dublin City of Dublin Police Department with seminars, and also we actually Yan Ling from the Chinese community has been working with the police staff to schedule meetings in the location in the past. Right now, this obviously 2020, we have to do a lot lot of online meetings. Prior to that, the police department was very helpful in terms of accommodating our community events in the Justice Center location. We held a number of community events, including the internship forums and also civic leadership forums. We are very thankful to the police department and also the city of Dublin as well. In addition to this, we found curating good two-way communication forums, online and offline, are very helpful as well. So we have been building a WeChat group. Right now it's close to 400 people from city of Dublin who are very actively engaged in the conversations and the exchange information. And also there are people who are sharing different information. Sometimes it can be false or half truth as well. So because of the active engagement, a lot of people will chime in to provide the right source and also help identify the disinformation. We found that was very helpful as well. In addition to that, APAPA and the OCA are teaming up to publish a official WeChat publication that currently has about 10,000 followers. Usually we publish a lot of articles about the community, about COVID, about civic engagement. So it was very well received overall. On average, each article gets about between 4,000 to 6,000 reads. And obviously also Dana and a few of us talk about possibly we can leverage the community task force for information sharing and also host ongoing or ad hoc meetings as well. Right now, Poland is trying to put together some action plans to share with us. Hopefully we can continue the conversations. That's all I have today. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to thank Vincent for joining me in that conversation. Pauline Yang had reached out to me and wanted to have a conversation, and I thought immediately of calling Vincent. He was very helpful, and we had a really productive discussion. And I've interacted with the Chinese community a lot over the years in a lot of different ways, but I always learn a whole lot of new things when we have these conversations. So it was really enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for your support.
Thank you for sharing that, Vincent. You guys have done so much charitable work. I wasn't aware of that and how active you've been. And I agree that the Year of the Ox sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Getting through this pandemic.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for your support. I think we need to do a better job in terms of communicating and also share the information with each other and support each other, especially this year. It is very important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vincent. I just want to say that's great what you guys are doing. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Thank you.
I had no idea. So that's fantastic. And all of the different, diversity committees that we have within Dublin need to kind of model after what you guys are doing. I mean, it's just phenomenal work. So for that.
Thank you. Definitely we can talk more on how we can help each other and establish more communication channels and also support our community members.
Along that line, I wonder if there's certain communications that you guys have adopted, certain messaging that you might share in an email exchange with the task force. If there's, I don't know if it's been developed, but I guess I'm imagining if you have that WeChat group and all, like, how are you combating the falsehoods about the virus? And is there any simple messaging that we should be aware of so that we can do a better effort with avoiding that negative, ill-informed messaging that people might be inclined to believe?
That's a very good question, Bridget. And as part of the WeChat group, we have about close to 400 people. So all from Dublin, City of Dublin residents. Some of those are like employees from City of Dublin, and also private enterprises within Dublin as well. And in addition to that, we formed a key communicator group that is sort of like a pre-selected people who are influential in the community, and we know that they are trustworthy. So we kind of form a smaller group on the side to help moderate the public group. So we strategically share good information, like truth in the group, credible information. In the meantime, they will periodically monitor what's being shared in the public group. And if there's something coming up that is like wrong or false, and they will chime in to help identify the right sources. And also other people, since it is a large group, there are always people who are truthful, who are willing to share their information. And that kind of sometimes it is self-moderating as well. So in addition to that, like I said, we are publishing the official WeChat. They have a so-called official account. So that is pre-screened, just like verified by the platform itself. We publish credible information from that WeChat account. Then we share the articles that is published from that account that can help people find the right source.
Thank you for that update, Vincent. I wasn't aware of all the work that you guys do, so I definitely appreciate you sharing that and letting us all know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Moving on, this part of the meeting, if there's any open-ended discussion anybody wants to bring forth, now would be the time.
Dana, I just had a quick question. I don't know because I haven't been down there. Do we have the bridge lit up for African American History Month, for Black History Month? Are we doing anything for that? I'm just curious. I know we were doing for LGBTQ and the Chinese New Year. I'm curious, do we have anything for this month or working on something?
Yeah, great question. I'm not exactly sure about the lining of the bridge as it relates to Black History Month, but in fact, I was going to bring that up before you all got off of here. The city has been doing some promotional events and the like for Black History Month. If you go to our website, you'll see some of those. And I also want to put Kofi up. I don't know if you got to see the video that Kofi did promoting Martin Luther King Jr. supper and so forth. I wanted to thank him for the time that he took to do that, which was fabulous, by the way. Good job that he did. I don't know if y'all got to see that or not. I couldn't answer the bridge lighting. I don't know if anyone else knows that offhand, but I apologize. I don't know for sure. And by the way, that calendar we talked about is brand new. So bear with us while we're trying to get that thing up and running and try to get everything in the calendar in a way that shows fairness and equity to everyone across the board. And so I don't know. I'll check on that, Erica, and get back to you. But I know that we're just kind of getting into that calendar to get it up and running.
Thank you, Dana. That'd be great.
Moving on, is there any new business or any new business that anybody would like to bring up? All right, with that being said, we have covered everything on our agenda. So I'll accept a motion to adjourn our meeting.
Oh, motion.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right, thank you guys for attending the meeting today.
Thank you,
Thank
Cody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Cody.
you, Mr. Chair. Good night.
Have a good week.